So today's exercise for the 1970 2.2 MFI engine, we are going to be rebuilding our cylinder heads. So I'm going to start pulling all of these down. I got a lot of machine operations that we need to do, particularly on studs. A lot of the studs on these are broken off in disassembly. We're probably going to end up having to resurface some of the gasket surfaces. These looks like they've taken a little bit of a beating, but let's get in and let's get it pulled apart, see what we're looking at, and get this thing moving. So just a quick point, when you are disassembling your cylinder heads and you start pulling out your valve spring shims, which is these are going to live underneath the valve springs, and you start pulling out a lot of shims. So this one we've got 2, 4, 5, 6 shims. Normally when we set shims, there'll probably be 3 to 4, but when we start pulling out 6, that's going to be an indication of the valve seat and the valve installed heights. So this one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and take my calipers and do a quick measurement before anything. So this head has just been disassembled, and this one has an installed valve height of 48.82. This is before we do any machining for valves or seats. So before we even get started, I already know that the valve seat itself will need to be replaced in these heads. So I've got the cylinder heads apart, and pretty much as I thought going into it, they are pretty well worn on out. All the valve seats are going to need to be done on the exhaust side. I'm not sure on the intakes yet. The installed heights on the exhaust side were way over where they should have been from factory, so it looks like the last 2 valve jobs that this had, the guys that did them didn't exactly know what they were doing. Valve guides are sharp, we'll be doing those. So the next step now is get everything cleaned up that we're going to save. So that's the heads and just the shims and collets retainers. Valves and springs are going straight into the trash, and we'll move on. So I've got the heads through the first bead blast. They're probably going to get blasted again. I'm going to go ahead and pull the valve guides next. I've got some pretty tough carbon stuck in the exhaust port, so I think with the guides out that's going to help. And then next I'm going to pull the intake and exhaust seats, and then finally do a final blast on it after that. So today I'm going to be changing the valve guides out. We've already pushed the old ones out. The bores for the valve guides were really beat up, so we're going to go to a first oversize. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to dial in on my valve pocket and make sure I'm concentric to the valve guide. There we go, make sure everything's nice and straight. And I'm just going to recheck how concentric we are to the actual valve guide bore. So I've got all the intake valve guides down. The next thing, the exhaust studs on this one are in really bad shape. You can see here how much it's rotted away, and the gasket sealing surface is all pitted from years of sitting around and rusted exhaust. So before I go ahead and take it out of this particular fixture and flip it over to do the exhaust side, I'm just going to take my hacksaw. I'm going to go ahead and cut off all of these studs. There's no point trying to unwind them. They're just going to snap. We had to drill out a bunch when we pulled the motor down. And I'm going to drill and time cert these, and then I'm going to resurface our exhaust flange surface just to make sure we've got a nice clean mating surface for the gasket when we get the motor back together. So we just finished cutting out all of the old studs. I am now gonna set up on my center. I did a rough level using just a quick table level to get it so they were kind of straight up and down. But now I'm gonna dial in, make sure my surface is parallel, so when I drill out what's left of the studs, everything will be nice and straight. And then I'll go ahead and time cert all of the holes. So now I've got all of my exhaust studs are being drilled out, and I've drilled and tapped all the holes ready to be time certed. I'm gonna just take a fly cutter and fly cut this surface just to smoothen out all of the corrosion. So I've just rolled the cylinder heads over onto the exhaust side. I'm going to dial in on the exhaust seat pockets and then the valve guide pockets.
Make sure that the valve guide balls are nice and plumb, and then I'm going to go ahead and ream those to the oversize as well, so when I have the heads off the fixture I can go ahead and drive in both the intake and exhaust valve guides. So now I've got these three heads pretty well all machined up. The valve guide bores have all been enlarged on both intake and exhausts. The exhaust manifold gasket surface has been machined. I've drilled out and rethreaded all of the stud holes for the exhaust studs. I've just got to put the time inserts into them. I'm going to go ahead and pull these off the machine, get these into the parts washer, and get the other three heads up and onto the bench so I can do the same to those. So I'm just going to go ahead and knock in the valve guides now, just using my regular old valve guide punch. And these are a phosphorus bronze valve guide. Then we're just going to check our installed height. So we're all good. I'm just going to knock out the rest of these and then back into the mill.
So I've got the heads back on my fixture. I've pressed in the new valve guides. Now we're going to dial in on the valve guides, ream them to the correct size. And then the next thing I'm going to do after I've reamed my valve guides is I'm going to go ahead and cut our new seat counter bores to accept our new valve seats. So I'm going to go ahead and put our valve guide pilot in. This is going to keep my seat counterbore cutter. I've already reamed everything here, so all our sizes, and I've tested them with a valve, so the valve goes in nicely. So I just want to press my valve pilot in. The spring is there to lift up on the tool, so when I'm cutting and I take the pressure off, the cutter will pop up by itself. We've got all of our new seats installed. The last thing that I was doing was valve guides, so we've moved through, the seats are installed. These are a custom built on the intake seat. What I had the seat company do for me was on the inside angles on our radius down inside here. I had that match the port shape. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize, that when you order a valve seat, you can specify what you want from them and they'll pretty much custom grind whatever you need. Today I'm going to be setting up and cutting my 3-angle valve job. So I'm going to do my 3 angles, intake and exhaust. That's also going to set my installed height on the valve, which is extremely important. It keeps all of our rocker ratios good. And then hopefully by the end of day tomorrow, we should be able to go ahead and assemble these heads all the way up. I've still got to put the inserts in on my exhaust side studs. We had them on the mill, and you've already seen that footage where I've drilled, tapped, and counterbored. The exhaust gasket surface has already all been machined, so we're kind of getting down onto the home stretch with these heads, and soon should be able to wrap up this part of the project. Even though the valve guides, I've replaced them and reamed them, the final part of the process with the valve guide is to set the true installed size. So I have my go, no-go gauge. On my go side, I have the valve guide, what it should be. And this one I haven't honed yet. And if I put the go gauge in, you can see it's still tight, won't go down in at all. And my no-go is an oversize, and this is set so if I mess up and overhone, this one should not go in. If it does, then I would be better off to remove that guide and do it again. So these two I've already honed, and if I put the go gauge in, it slides in nice and smooth, and the no-go gauge won't go. So I'm just going to go ahead and hone the rest of these. It doesn't take a lot. I'm using a ball flex hone just on my cordless drill. And then once I'm honed, just want to check my size. This one's still a little bit tight, so I'm going to go a little bit more. It still needs a little bit more. It's going in, but it's a little bit sticky. Could also be that I haven't washed out that guide just yet. Just going to give it a real light pass right now. Perfect. And then our go gauge slides in all the way. It's nice and smooth. If I check it with my no-go, no-go won't even get started. So we're up to the final machine operation on our 911E cylinder heads. I've already gone ahead on the first cylinder and I've cut the first seat. This is so I could set my seat width, and you can see there's some remnants of blue on the seat. That's where I was patterning it against the valve. And I've also set the installed height of the valve so I can set the stop on my milling machine. That means as I move over to the next head, I can just drop it back in, down until I hit the stop, and so on and so on. Now, the angles that we're going to be cutting, this is going to be a 4-angle valve job. We have a 3D profile cutter that has 3 of our angles on the cutter itself, and then we're going to come in with a final finishing 15-degree angle, which is just going to take the remnants of the last part of the seat that didn't get cut by the 3D profile and smoothen that out at 15 degrees so it meets the cylinder head. Okay, all we got to do is check the valve pattern and then we can move on to the next one. So I finished all of the machine operations on these cylinder heads. I've just finished doing the lap on the valve where each valve has been lapped to its individual seat. Next they're going into the parts washer so I can wash out all of my lapping paste and bronze residue and aluminum shavings from machine work. Then finally is going to be final assembly and pressure test.
So I've got everything perfectly clean now. I'm going to go ahead and start my assembly. I'm just going to start with the intake valve. So the first thing I've got to do before I put the valve stem seal on is I'm going to find my installed heights. So I'm going to put the spring seat in, special tool, and a couple of retainers. And I'm going to read it off. Right now it looks like it is about 36.5 millimeters. So I'm going to put in 2 shims and recheck it. Perfect. Right on 35.5 millimeters. So now I'm just going to go ahead and put on my valve stem seal. Then valve is going to come in next. I'm just going to lubricate the stem. Now it's ready for the new valve spring. So now I'm going to do the exhaust side. Since it took 2 shims on the intake, I'm going to start with 3 on the exhaust because the exhaust valve springs are looking for more pressure. And looks like it needs 1 more shim. So I don't have to remeasure it because I know the size of the shims. So the last thing I've got to do to complete this head is install our new exhaust studs. So I'm just going to make sure it goes in the right way.
So we finished up all 6 cylinder heads. These took a lot of work. They've been really worked over by the previous shops that have worked on these things. The only thing that's really left that's original to these heads are the cam box studs and the intake studs. All the valves were changed, the springs were changed, the guides were changed. On the underside, we've got new custom seats on both the intake and the exhaust side. The exhaust studs were done, and the exhaust flanges were also remachined because they were really quite corroded. All in all, everything came up really nice, and they are ready to go on the motor. So I'd like to say thanks for watching. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more, hit the subscribe button. If you'd like to see more in-depth on how to rebuild this stuff, head over to classicats.com. We have some extensive training courses on rebuilding cylinder heads, and we'll see you on the next one.